It's Friday, February 3rd. Let's talk PlayStation. So, if you have been in the market for PlayStation VR, you know the past few months it's actually been pretty hard to find one. It's actually been in pretty low supply and pretty much sold out everywhere. Even online retailers, like, just nobody has PlayStation VR. And we were also talking about how that was a reason why VR sales are a little bit slow right now, because Sony just doesn't even have any of these things lying around to sell people. Well, this past week, Sony announced that they do have two new bundles that are going to be coming to retailers and stores soon, so you can finally get PlayStation VR if you've been dying to get your hands on one. So one is a return of the launch bundle. It's not called the launch bundle anymore, but it's essentially the same thing. $4.99 US. It's the two move controllers, the headset, obviously the camera, a copy of PlayStation VR Worlds. And then there's going to be an EB Games and GameStop exclusive bundle, essentially the same thing, but instead of PlayStation VR Worlds, you're going to be getting Until Dawn Rush of Blood. So kind of pick your poison there in terms of what game you want to go for, but thankfully more PlayStation VR units are on the way. And it is that time, everyone. Time to discuss Sony financials. This is for Q3, and once again, very good news for PlayStation and not so good news for Sony Corporation as a whole. So for Sony PlayStation, obviously, PS4 still doing very, very well. So the console actually sold 9.7 million units for Q3. From the previous year, that's up from 8.4 million units. Sony is saying that this is the best 3 months that they've ever had for PlayStation 4 on the market, selling that many systems, 9.7 within that 3 month period. And Sony is saying by March 2017, they're hoping to have around 60 million systems shipped worldwide. This still would put it on pace to have a faster rate of sale than the PlayStation 2 did at its respective time frame. Sales have increased 5.2%. And operating income for games and services, so like PSN, for example, that went up 50 billion yen this past quarter. Sony is attributing the sales percentage increase due to the lower manufacturing costs of PS4, PS4 Pro, PlayStation VR, and your typical game sales. Now, for Sony Corporation as a whole, operating income plummeted 54.3% when you compare it to the previous year. In terms of pointing fingers there, that goes to the Sony Pictures portion of Sony Corporation. Kind of the same story we always have with, Sony financials. PlayStation still doing well, Sony Corporation still having some ups and downs, some problems, and it is always one or two different sectors or divisions of Sony. As of recent, it seems like a lot of big troubles are happening with Sony Pictures. One thing that Sony always does particularly well is when they supply camera components and lenses for other manufacturers for like their cameras and iPhones, for example. Sony is a supplier for that, so they always do pretty well there. But it's just the same thing we keep seeing, and I guess that the only discussion that leads from that is the fact that PlayStation is still relatively safe. There was always, especially during the PlayStation 3 lifecycle, there was always this looming fear of what is Sony Corporation going to do with PlayStation, because PlayStation 3 at the time was losing Sony billions of dollars. They were really struggling. They were at like one of their lowest points, and it really was sort of a question mark for what Sony was going to do. And now we're in a completely different place where Sony is kind of, going forward. They've been making profits, and although certain divisions of Sony have been really tapering off, PlayStation is still doing quite well. Now, there are no specifics in terms of PS4 Pro and PSVR sales, although the one thing we can say is that Sony had commented on the sales of both of them. For PlayStation VR, they're saying it's in line with expectations. I believe they gave this quote, a similar quote or statement about a few months ago regarding PlayStation VR, saying it's in line with expectations. Rightfully so. If they don't even have the amount of units to supply, if they know they made this many and they sold all of them, then yeah, they're in line with your expectations. PlayStation 4 Pro, they're saying slightly better than they were expecting, which is semi-surprising. I guess not really. I guess they kind of knew that it was going to be a more like a lower volume system. They knew it was going to sell comparably lower to the base PlayStation 4, because the base PlayStation 4 is a lot more affordable, and there's not necessarily a big demand to buy a console that is going to project images that you can't even display, because most people don't own a 4K television. And there's just really no, super huge demand for it. But I guess that was always part of the discussion whenever we talked about PS4 Pro and the idea of PS4 Pro, which is that you don't necessarily have to go out and get it. It's still a regular PS4 at the end of the day. Sony's just hoping that's sort of it. I would assume that it's a long-term adoption. It's an option there, and slowly you'd see more and more people sort of migrate, and that goes into Sony's long-term goal of whatever PS5 will be and things of that nature. Now, for our final news story, I may have used this in the headline. You may have already seen this. This is definitely making the rounds on the internet. This isn't super specific to PlayStation, but certainly it's specific to all of us that play games and have access to a GameStop or EB Games. This one's, I think, is pretty important. So, this past week, it was revealed by on Kotaku, an article by Jason Schreier, discussing GameStop's policies, and one policy that they're sort of pushing on their employees. This sort of program that they're doing internally in stores. It's called the Circle of Life, and this sort of program that they're doing internally in stores started about 2 months ago, so this is relatively new, and it's very aggressive towards customers, and it's very aggressive towards the employees that work at the stores. And what it more or less has amounted to is employees sometimes blatantly lying to customers, trying to improve their quotas. So the Circle of Life program requires GameStop employees to reach certain quotas for 4 different points of sale. One would be pre-orders, trade-ins that they accept, selling pre-owned merchandise, getting people to buy the rewards power card, and I guess the employees there, and this is all completely public information, by the way. This isn't necessarily a rumor at all. It started as an article, and then a bunch of GameStop employees just came straight out and talked about it. There's even a Reddit article from a GameStop employee giving other GameStop employees tips on how to increase their to meet their sales and quota expectations. And it gets to a very fine line of straight up lying to customers. And it's not necessarily a matter of corporate saying lie to customers. I guess there are some stipulations of district managers and things kind of implying that you should do that and things like that. But some employees have boiled down to, making their own personal decision of lying to a customer and saying, oh, this game is, let's say the customer goes in and asks for a new game. The GameStop employee has to reach a certain quota. Buying a new game would hurt that quota. So the GameStop employee apparently would lie and say the game is not in stock new, but we do have it pre-owned. Therefore, even if the game is completely in stock, brand new, they would tell you no, it's not there. And it's very pressuring to the employees because apparently this is highly enforceable from a supervisor and corporate level. This is something that is getting employees worried because they straight up lose their jobs if they don't meet these numbers. And it clearly is completely anti-consumer and sucks for people that visit GameStop stores. Now, GameStop has already publicly responded to this, and they gave a very PR answer, and the PR answer actually sort of admits to this, saying something along the lines of our internal policies are they're specifically designed to provide customer the best value and all that nonsense. But it's pretty clear, set in stone, and everybody knows about it at this point. And I think the big problem is it's GameStop corporate. I wouldn't necessarily. I mean, I guess it comes down to a morality thing with certain employees if they want to make the decision to lie to people and things like that. And things like that. I mean, it's really down to them. You can't necessarily fault them if their livelihood depends on it, assuming that most of their income comes from that as a job. At the same time, like I said, it's a morality thing, straight up lying to people. Same with up to upwards of supervisors and district managers, but ultimately GameStop corporate. Yeah, it's just that's the problem. GameStop corporate is just so misguided, and they're really it's almost like they're out of touch with the appropriate way to sort of talk to the consumer, and it's not. See, this story came out, and it's like right away, ooh, GameStop's evil, and yeah, they're pretty fucking evil in this scenario. But it's like, who didn't see something like this coming? Because in the past decade, we've seen some pretty aggressive, internal policies and programs from GameStop. We knew about them all along. This just kind of takes it to a whole goddamn new level. But I would have to assume, and I know this is true for many people, it's gotten to a point where many people don't go into GameStop anymore. I myself included. I do get incredibly infuriated and annoyed when I go in there and I'm berated left and right with all these pitches and whatnot. And hey, that's their job. I don't fault them for it. But it is really annoying. And that might be part of the problem. And that's why GameStop is losing so many people. And when, a new game sale is made at GameStop, they're not really seeing much of it. That's why they keep pushing all the pre-owned and the rewards cards, and that's all fine, I mean, there are other local game stores that do kind of the same shit when it comes to, pre-owned games. They'll take trade-ins, they'll take reservations, they sell new games, and they also sell old games. GameStop's just a much bigger, larger entity, and they're just doing it and going about it all the wrong way, you know what I'm saying? Like, some people want to attribute it to the fact that digital game sales are a big thing. They're, you know, increasing in popularity, and GameStop's relevance is slowly dwindling, and I've never really been of that mind. You know, certainly they would downsize, right? I mean, I think that's kind of, you know, in the tea leaves of, like, GameStop probably won't be able to stay as big as it is, but certainly they would be a sustainable company by any means, because, you know, whether you like it or not, some people don't like to hear it, some people think otherwise, but, I mean, physical media is still going to be around for indefinitely, more or less. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just not going to go anywhere. But, like, fucking, what do you call it? Records and vinyls. Like, even that still has a place today. It's a pure form. I mean, there are other companies now that are making a business off of, you know, working with small publishers and developers to make physical retail copies of their $10 game on PSN. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's always going to be a place for it. And so there's always going to be a place for a brick and mortar store to sell physical games. GameStop just needs to find its place, and it seems like they're really kicking and screaming their way into this sort of future that they obviously don't want to go into, but it's something they're going to have to go into. And this is not the right way to go about it. They're just kind of, it almost seems like they're really sort of stretching the amount of time that they can get out of being as big as they are, and being as aggressive as they are, and maximizing as much profits as they can out of the consumer. And I don't think they realize that that's really just turning people the wrong way. And when you have a news story like this come out, it's really damaging in the long term. And if I don't know what they're doing over there, I mean, what do I know? I don't run a multi-million-dollar corporation, but this just is not how I would go about it. And the damn thing is, I always think of it from an employee perspective. I always think about that all the time. Whenever I walk into a business or I'm provided a service, for some reason, it's always like the first thing in my head, like, what is it from their perspective? I don't know. It's just something I do. And it's the same thing I think about, like, with any like retail employee that maybe works on commission or something like that, or has to meet a sales quota. It just sounds stressful as fuck. And the fact that they're being this heavily forced, and to the point where it could cost them their job, it's just so unnecessary and stressful, and it just doesn't benefit anybody, and it's really shitty. And I really hope GameStop gets to a place where they can not be as terrible as they're being. Those are just some of the news stories I want to talk about with you guys this week. So if you didn't see, because you didn't see anything, there was no Let's Play or anything this past week. I know this channel's going downhill, nothing. I felt like shit. There's a bug going around my stomach and everything. I had fatigue, and just I felt awful. I wouldn't go along the lines of saying I was like sick with the flu or anything, but I was certainly sick, and I just didn't feel like doing anything. Didn't even play games or nothing. I was mostly in bed, or just just being like a lazy bastard homebody. However, Monday will be a special little video, a special Let's Play that nobody will see this coming. It's actually kind of weird. It's actually kind of creepy. I think some people might enjoy it, and I think most of you won't give a shit. And that's fine. I just hope I entertain at least one person with it. And then after that video, we'll start up a new Let's Play more than likely. So that's what's going on with me. How about you? Tell me. How's school? How's college? You asked that girl out yet? You guys don't tell me anything about yourselves, and quite frankly, it's a little selfish. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Badecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I'll see you guys next Friday.